The heart monitor stutters, then flatlines. A vial of propofol catches the light like a blade. Outside, Los Angeles keeps moving. Sirens, traffic, neon. Inside, silence weighs more than sound. And at Neverland, a kingdom of carousels and locked gates waits in eerie stillness, as if it too holds its breath. How does the brightest light in modern music end not with applause, but with a chemical hush in a private room? The monitor may have gone silent in 2009, but the mystery had been building for decades. Every triumph, every scandal, every whispered rumor was already writing the script of that final night. Tonight, we trace those threads backward into the labyrinth that was Michael Jackson's life. This is not a shrine, and it is not a trial. It is an excavation. Tonight, we peel back layers. Science from superstition, fact from folklore, record from rumor, to ask a question few dare to hold. What do we truly know of Michael Jackson's life and last days? And what have we chosen instead to believe? You're watching Chronicle of Secrets, where legends are not repeated, but unwrapped. Every legend has an unlikely birthplace, and Michael Jackson's began in a town that smelled of molten steel. Gary, Indiana, where the sky was gray with factory smoke and futures seemed fixed to the assembly line. Inside a cramped house, a father believed salvation would not come from school books or church pews, but from music drilled into his children with the precision of machinery. For young Michael, childhood did not unfold. It was engineered. Rehearsals replaced play. Applause became oxygen. Fear became discipline. Out of this crucible emerged the Jackson Five. 5 brothers moving in lockstep, but only one who seemed touched by something beyond training. Audiences didn't just hear Michael. They felt an uncanny presence in his voice, a child who carried the sorrow of an old soul. Motown's executives knew instantly. This was not just talent, it was lightning in a bottle. Their singles tore up the charts, but more importantly, they announced that the American dream could be sung by a black child from Indiana, and the world would stop to listen. Then came the solo metamorphosis. Off the Wall, 1979, shimmered with joy, bridging disco's dying glow with a new, sophisticated pop. But Thriller, 1982, was not just music, it was sorcery. It turned music videos into short films, concerts into ritual, and an artist into a global myth. To millions, it felt less like an album and more like an event humanity had been waiting for. And yet, success is never just triumph, it is also exposure. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. What happens to a boy forced into stardom when the world magnifies every movement, every blemish, every rumor? That is where the story sharpens. Because what began as a machine producing a star would soon become a machine consuming him. Legends are rarely allowed to stay human. The brighter the star, the more people demand a flawless surface. But a surface can lie. With Michael Jackson, that surface became the most debated canvas on Earth. By the mid-1980s, his skin began to change. Each year, lighter. Each performance different. To the tabloids, it was open season. Headlines shrieked that he was rejecting his blackness, that fame had driven him to remake his own DNA. To comedians, it was a punchline. To millions, it became a riddle wrapped in makeup and mystery. But medicine tells a quieter story. Vitiligo, a condition where pigment cells abandon the skin, leaving behind ghostly patches. Under stage lights, those patches weren't subtle, they screamed. Lupus, another autoimmune intruder, further thinned the armor. Makeup became not vanity, but survival. And sometimes, chemical treatments were used not to transform him, but to unify what disease had shattered. Still, the world resisted the clinical truth. A simple explanation could not compete with the seductive drama of rumor. Society preferred to believe in a man ashamed of himself rather than a man afflicted by biology. It was easier to mock than to empathize. In 1993, during his interview with Oprah Winfrey, Michael sat beneath glaring studio lights and finally named it. I have vitiligo. 62 million people heard him. But belief is rarely democratic. Many nodded in sympathy. Many others clung to their suspicion. Once a myth hardens, even science bends under its weight. And so, the face in the mirror was no longer his own reflection. It became a battlefield for culture wars, race, identity, authenticity. A man who sang, "It don't matter if you're black or white," was condemned by both sides for how his body betrayed him. That is the darker mystery here. Not why his skin turned pale, but why we, the audience, refused to accept the truth staring back at us. Perhaps what frightened us was not Michael Jackson's changing face, but the uncomfortable reminder that nature, fame, and prejudice could all rewrite a human being before our eyes. But mirrors only reveal a reflection. To know the man, you must step through the glass and into the kingdom he built, Neverland, where innocence was staged and shadows gathered. There are places in history that refuse to be just geography. They become symbols, battlegrounds, myths. For Michael Jackson, that place was Neverland. In 1988, he bought the estate and transformed it into something no one had ever seen, a personal kingdom of wonder. Ferris wheels spun where cattle once grazed. A zoo stood where orchards had been. Trains circled like toy tracks drawn across California hillsides. Loudspeakers whispered music into the trees. It was as if a fairy tale had erupted into the real world. But the fairy tale carried a shadow. To some, Neverland was a sanctuary, an artist giving sick children and underprivileged kids a taste of magic. To others, it was camouflage, a stage set too perfect, hiding dangers in its secret rooms. The gates of Neverland became a threshold not only of property, but of perception. Cross them, and you entered whichever story you already believed. Admirers saw innocence restored. Critics saw innocence exploited. Investigators, armed with search warrants and suspicion, turned carousels into evidence and bedrooms into exhibits. The legal outcomes are documented: lawsuits, settlements, an acquittal in a high-profile trial. But the cultural verdict never closed. Even years after his death, documentaries reopened the case in the court of public opinion, igniting old arguments like dry tinder. So what was Neverland, truly? Eden or trap? Fantasy or facade? Perhaps both, and that is the deeper mystery. Because Neverland tells us less about Michael Jackson than it does about ourselves. We project onto it our fears of lost innocence, our suspicion of power, our longing for paradise that never quite exists. Michael built Neverland to stop time, but time kept moving, and the dream he built hardened into myth. To walk through its empty gates today is to feel two worlds colliding, a child's laughter echoing faintly in the air, and a silence heavy enough to make you wonder, what really happened here? By the summer of 2009, Michael Jackson stood on the edge of a comeback that promised to rewrite his legacy. The tour was called This Is It, a title that now reads like prophecy. On stage, he was still magnetic. The rehearsal footage shows him conducting dancers with a fingertip, shaping sound with a single glance. For fans, it felt like time had reversed. But backstage, another clock was ticking. Michael could not sleep. Nights stretched into dawn, mind racing, body restless. The stage demanded superhuman energy. Insomnia stripped him bare. Doctors call sleep the second heartbeat, the rhythm that sustains everything else. Michael's heartbeat was faltering. Into this void came propofol, a drug meant to cradle patients into unconsciousness while surgeons cut. Hospitals treat it like dynamite, only with monitors, ventilators, and trained teams standing by. Yet in Michael's bedroom, it became a nightly ritual. No alarms, no sterile room, just a man desperate for silence and a doctor willing to improvise. Each infusion was a paradox. The very act of seeking rest brought him closer to permanent rest. He was rehearsing for 2 shows at once, the concert millions longed to see, and the silent curtain call. He did not. June 25th, morning light over Los Angeles. In one room, costumes for This Is It hung waiting. In another, Michael Jackson lay still, breath shallow, his body caught between anesthesia and eternity. By the time paramedics arrived, the show was over. But this was not only a medical failure, it was an allegory. A legend who had conquered charts, borders, and color lines fell victim to the oldest human flaw: exhaustion. A doctor crossed the boundary between healing and enabling. And an industry hungry for spectacle pressed forward, blind to the fragility of the man at its center. That day, the stage in London remained empty. The true final performance unfolded under fluorescent hospital lights, an audience of medics, not fans. The king of pop had rehearsed his resurrection. Instead, the rehearsal became his requiem. And so the question lingers, unresolved. Was this simply malpractice, or the inevitable collapse of a life stretched too far between myth and mortality? Theaters are built for applause. Courtrooms are built for judgment. Both have stages, both have audiences, but only one is merciless. After June 25, 2009, the spotlight shifted, no longer on a man in sequins, but on a man in a suit, Dr. Conrad Murray. The charge was involuntary manslaughter, simple words, but heavy with paradox. Could negligence alone bring down a king? Or was this trial a ritual, society demanding a name, a face, a single scapegoat for a tragedy too large to grasp? The prosecution's story was stark. A physician wielding propofol like a sleep aid, stripping away the safeguards of modern medicine. No monitors, no oxygen, no second chance. And when Michael's body faltered, the response was chaos. Delays, hidden vials, explanations that shifted like smoke. The defense countered with a mirror image: Michael Jackson as insomniac sovereign, too powerful to refuse, too desperate to deny. Murray, they claimed, was no villain, only a man trapped in the gravitational pull of a star who could not sleep. Some even whispered the unthinkable, that Michael himself might have taken the final dose. For 6 weeks, the courtroom became its own theater. Expert witnesses recited chemistry like incantations. Lawyers choreographed their questions. The jury, silent as stone, watched it all. And in the end, the curtain fell on a single word: guilty. Conrad Murray would serve 4 years, though half that behind bars. Yet the verdict felt less like closure and more like an intermission, because the deeper question refused to die. Could one doctor truly carry the weight of an empire's collapse? Or was Murray merely the last, weakest link in a chain woven from insomnia, exploitation, and the endless appetite of an audience that always demanded more? Courtroom light does not flatter. It does not hide flaws or mask fatigue. It exposes. And in that light, the story of Michael Jackson's death no longer resembled a crime scene. It resembled a parable. A legend whose body broke under the pressure of myth, and a doctor who became history's unwilling antagonist. And so the trial ended, but the mystery remained. Was justice truly served, or was it only staged? Another performance, this time for the world's hunger to explain the unexplainable. Courtrooms deliver verdicts, but they do not close the book. To speak of Michael Jackson fairly, we must weigh more than charges. We must weigh the life itself, its glory and its cost. To weigh Michael Jackson's life is to open a ledger written not in ink, but in light and shadow. On one page, the brilliance is undeniable. He was the conjurer who bent music into vision, who turned concerts into pilgrimages and albums into global rights. Billie Jean, smooth criminal, man in the mirror. These are not merely songs, but spells, still echoing in streets, clubs, and bedrooms across the planet, long after the magician himself has left the stage. His art was alchemy, beats into belief, rhythm into ritual. But turn the page, and the cost bleeds through. For every ovation, there was a night of insomnia. For every standing crowd, a courtroom. For every moonwalk, a lonely corridor where silence pressed too heavily. Fame does not sift the gold from the fragile. It harvests both with the same hand, leaving brilliance and wound bound together. This is why he feels less like a man than a myth in motion. Legends are mirrors, yes, but also labyrinths. In Michael's reflection, we see not just our longing for transcendence, but our fear of collapse. He is proof that talent can shatter barriers of race, geography, and time itself. And he is proof that no one escapes the labyrinth of fame without distortion. The ledger cannot be balanced. Glory stains cost, and cost stains glory until they are inseparable, like light and shadow on the same coin. Genius does not erase vulnerability. Vulnerability does not diminish genius. They coexist, fused, unsettling, eternal. And perhaps that is the truest mystery of Michael Jackson. Not that he was flawless, but that flaw and brilliance shared the same fragile vessel. A man, a myth, and a mirror, reminding us that immortality is always purchased, and the currency is contradiction. Every legend casts a second life in shadow. With Michael Jackson, the shadows came thick and fast. Stories whispered louder than the facts ever spoke. They said he slept in an oxygen coffin, like a pharaoh entombed in glass, bargaining with time to pause its hand. They said his face was a sculpture of obsession, reshaped again and again, until bone itself bent to his will. They said his fame was too vast to be human, that he must have danced with secret brotherhoods, bound to contracts not of this world. And even now, they say he never truly died, that the man who vanished in 2009 still lingers somewhere, walking unnoticed through crowds that mourn his ghost. Why do such myths thrive? Because truth feels too small. Insomnia, medication, frailty. These explanations reduce a colossal figure to the scale of ordinary tragedy. Myth restores symmetry. It makes us believe he wrestled eternity, not exhaustion. It transforms a mortal collapse into something closer to prophecy. But look deeper, and the myths become mirrors. They show us what we long for: immortality, transformation, secret knowledge, the refusal to let our idols fall. By weaving Michael Jackson into conspiracies, we reveal more about our hunger than about him. We would rather believe in hidden chambers, occult covenants, or staged deaths than admit the simplest horror, that even the brightest star can fall under the same laws that bind us all. And yet, are myths only fantasy? Or do they contain fragments, distorted reflections of truths we half suspect but cannot prove? This uncertainty is the labyrinth. We enter it not to escape, but to wander, each corridor lined with whispers, each echo reminding us that Michael Jackson is no longer just a man, but a mystery designed to outlive him. Myth can illuminate, but it can also mislead. At some point, the researcher must put aside the legends and open the notebook, sorting what can be proven from what must remain uncertain. On my desk lies a notebook I have carried for years. Its pages are crowded with facts, but also with shadows. When studying Michael Jackson, one cannot help but feel that every certainty comes twinned with uncertainty, as if truth itself resists being held in one hand. The evidence is undeniable. Vitiligo marked his skin, confirmed not by gossip, but by autopsy. Propofol ended his life, not rumor, but chemical fact. The transcripts of trials remain, heavy volumes of testimony preserved in ink and archive. These are the stones we can step on without sinking. But around those stones stretches a tide that never rests. Why Neverland? Was it sanctuary or stage set for darker impulses? Were his changing features the product of illness, artistry, or an unrelenting battle with the mirror? Was he monster, martyr, or simply human? Too human for the weight of myths placed upon him. No court has answered these questions. History cannot either. What it gives us are fragments, and fragments are sharp. Perhaps this is the true lesson of the notebook, that Michael Jackson is no longer a single story, but a contested landscape. Fans, critics, accusers, defenders. Each has carved their version into the rock. And when so many hands write on the same page, no page remains clean. Close the notebook, and you are left not with clarity, but with echoes, inked lines, erased lines, spaces left deliberately blank, as if history itself concedes that not every riddle is meant to be solved. And maybe that is why his shadow still lengthens, because the mystery feeds on what is missing, not only what is known. And when the notebook closes, one truth remains. Every mystery still demands an ending. For Michael Jackson, that ending came on a June night when the music itself stopped and silence took the stage. June 25th, 2009. A date now etched into cultural stone. The world did not lose just a man that night. It lost its most visible phantom. He did not fall beneath stage lights or confetti, but alone, in a private chamber where even applause could not follow. For a life measured in rhythm, moonwalks, bass lines, the syncopation of millions of feet moving in unison, the final measure was silence. And yet, the silence was not empty. It spread like a shockwave. Radios cracked mid-song. News anchors abandoned scripts. Strangers gathered in candlelit vigils as if compelled by ritual. For a moment, humanity synchronized, not to his music, but to the void left when it ceased. But here lies the paradox. Death ended his body, not his presence. His voice still threads through speakers. His silhouette still haunts stages. His choreography still animates bodies, born decades after he last danced. His passing behaved less like disappearance than transfiguration. Perhaps this is the last riddle. Stars die, but their light travels centuries before fading from our sky. So it is with Michael Jackson. His death was an eclipse, sudden, total, yet never permanent. Even in darkness, the afterglow endures. The night the music stopped, the echo began. It vibrates still, half memory, half ghost, reminding us that immortality is not absence of death, but the refusal of silence. And if you lean closely, even now, you might hear it. In the shuffle of a dancer's shoe, in the gasp of a crowd, in the quiet between heartbeats, Michael Jackson, still singing through the spaces where silence thought it had won. If this passage through evidence and shadows has held you, then you already know. You are part of a fellowship that refuses to take the surface for the whole story. Here, we pursue what history hides, and we listen where silence tries to speak. Michael Jackson's labyrinth is vast, but it is only one. Beyond it lie other corridors, other secrets sealed in stone, in water, in rumor, and we will walk there together. So keep your curiosity sharp as a lantern, your skepticism steady as a compass, and your heart open, because every truth worth seeking waits just beyond the last closed door. The music may end, the man may vanish, but the mysteries do not. They are still here, waiting. If this journey spoke to you, subscribe to Chronicle of Secrets, share this story, and join us for the next chapter, where another legend will be unwrapped and another truth tested. Until then, stay curious.